Hey Bluefire Poker, this is Dustin Schmidt, also known as Leatherass. In today's video, we are continuing the Leatherass on Poker series. In part one, we did You Have Other Options. We ran through all of those hands and explained a number of different concepts. And like I said, I've kind of grouped them into some concepts, although this one's kind of a hodgepodge, like overbetting, range merging, and Mississippi bluffing. We'll probably just try and get through all these right now. Maybe B and C we can get through now, and then I think part 3 will be when their hand is face up. We have a few examples there. I'll probably work through that in a few of the big decisions in part 3, and then finish the big decisions in part 4. So I hope you guys enjoyed the first one, and with that, we'll go ahead and go right into the first hand. Alright, so this play has a little bit of everything going on here in it. Wasn't quite sure how to label this one, but I think it starts off as sort of like a range merging situation, and then we can kind of go from there. But basically, the button raises, small blind folds, and I go ahead and call it King Queen here. I flop a really great flop for my hand. I mean, there's very few hands that I'm behind, certainly. I guess, I mean, it's kind of funny because I would venture to say that you'd be kind of considered like a fish back in the day. And I know I've talked several times before about how poker was, when I started professionally. You'd be like a huge donkey to like check raise this flop here because you'd only get action from better hands. So in today's day and age, though, I kind of start to look at these as kind of like flopping a set. It's not quite as powerful, of course, but I kind of just tend to play it like it's pretty much the mortal nuts with people that just kind of min-raise the button with like these 60-70% ranges, and I mean, this is a pretty darn good flop for a hand. So I start off by checking. My opponent bets half pot, and I decide to go ahead and check raise about 3 times his bet. I like this play because, first off, I mean, I'm pretty happy to check raise and go bet. Assuming the board run out is decent, but there's not going to be too many bad board run outs here. And I just expect to get paid off by worse by the river quite a bit, and especially since I will take a hand like ace-3 of diamonds, and maybe play it that way, or maybe even like a 5-6 of hearts or something with like a backdoor and a gut shot. So I'm going to be check raising some of those hands, certainly in this spot. So I kind of want to have some value hands like King Queen here in my range, certainly. So my opponent decides to pretty much click it back here. He makes it 100, and this is also part of the reason why I'm check raising it. Is when I see this happening, I'm not freaking out at all. I'm going, yes. He thinks I have nothing, and he's making a play. I just really don't give credit to this being a better hand very often at all. I think it certainly can be from time to time, but the one thing to keep in mind is that in this situation, if you are up against a better hand, you're definitely paying off 3 barrels from your opponent, and you're going to have a pretty decent chunk of your stack in at that point anyway. Maybe not if he just min raises the button and half pots the flop, but for a lot of people who are making it more than min raise and then making it more like 3/4 on the flop, certainly you're going to be paying off 3 streets in this situation anyway. So I really don't mind just saying, well, what the hell, I'm going to lose a bunch anyway with this hand, and I might as well try and play it a little fancier to try and get a little more value out of it. And if I am against a better hand, I'm going to lose a little bit more, but I think enough cool stuff is going to happen by playing it aggressively. So my opponent re-raises this, and I'm thinking about it in this situation, and I'm thinking, well, I'm pretty sure I have the best hand still, but calling does look like, I have something. And sometimes when I have nothing here, I'll call and then lead the turn, which I think works pretty well in that spot when you're pretty sure your opponent's just sort of full of it. So I don't really have that sort of. I've never really done that against him, I don't think. So I didn't really want to like call and then lead, or call and check call, because I just feel like he might shut down a lot. He might just be kind of making one play at it, and if I call, he'll assume I'm trapping with some set, or got something that won't fold, and he might just give up. So I think the best play here is just to basically go ahead and kind of click it back here. And that's pretty much exactly what I did, just clicked it back. And then I think that gives him the option to spaz out, because now I'm starting to get real polarized too. Whereas if I call, I'm sort of less polarized, because I sort of have to have something, or at least in his mind I have to have something, which you can call in that spot with your air, and maybe even not lead, but just see if it goes check check on the turn, and then just lead the river. And usually you're getting a fold almost always on the river in that situation. So I kind of wanted to give him a chance, since I do have a hand, to spaz out a little bit more. And so I go ahead and click it back here, and I'm really not expecting him to fold to this click back too often. I expect him at least flat, and figure, well, a flat one, and if he gives up on the turn, then it's like free money. If he checks the turn, he might think he could just make a small little stab and win the pot. So he does go ahead and call here, and the turn is a 5 of diamonds. And so my plan here is basically look like I made one more click back for fun, and then, just decided to go ahead and give up on it. So I go ahead and check the turn, and then my opponent makes a pretty large bet, actually. And I wasn't quite sure what to make of that, but a lot of times in these situations I'll go ahead and just check call, and give him a chance to do something funny, especially if it's like an offsuit deuce on the turn, or an offsuit 9, or something like that. But given it was a 5 of diamonds, and it put a backdoor flush draw, and some nasty straight cards that can come, given that I kind of think he can have any 2 here in this spot, you kind of have to worry about a little bit of everything in that situation. And I didn't really expect, given he bet big, for him to bluff the river also. And I really think something like him having like a jack 8 of diamonds or something like that is possible, or like a jack 6 of diamonds, or something sort of random like that would all of a sudden get excited and want to make a big bet on the turn to sort of commit themselves with, is what's probably going to be a pretty big draw here. So I just didn't see any merit in calling again, and so I went ahead and check raise, given stacks were going to be close to nothing there on the river, at least relative to the pot. So I went ahead and check raised here, and I had my read pretty close, where he ended up having nothing, but and I was fortunate enough to dodge it, because he had a pretty big draw on me on the turn. But I think that's definitely a situation where you're going to want to check raise those spots and sort of induce, potentially induce some of this stuff. And then what can also happen is you can start, check raising your air here when you do show up with hands like this, and they're like, well, gosh, you might have that like king jack, king queen type of hand. Like I should probably just fold. And then you can just start check raising these flops that you're not repping much on against them in the future. So for all those reasons, I think this is going to be a pretty good play to put in your arsenal. Alright, so on to the next hand, and this one won't require a ton of explanation, but I just think it's a good spot when used sparingly, and again, just to kind of expand your playbook a little bit. Player 1, small blind raises, I defend here. I don't know. You could fold there. You could 3-bet there from time to time. You could call. I don't think it really matters a whole lot. I just chose to defend here in this spot. My opponent, it's the type of board here, I obviously have nothing. I do catch a lot of cards on the turn that kind of give me some gut shots, which is, better than nothing. But not a great flop. But more importantly, it's a flop that's really difficult for player 1 to hit. I mean, I think he was opening the small blind something like, 38 to 45%, which is sort of common. And, you can go ahead and Flopzilla that or something and figure out how often he has, basically top pair or better here, and it's not too often. So, but the trick is, how do we win the pot? Because in order to make a play, we've sort of got to rep a very, very narrow range as well. So this is something that I think is fine from time to time. I don't think it's something you necessarily want to make a habit of, but I do notice that just when I sort of randomly decide, like, I'm going to win this pot, or I'm going to try and win this pot anyway, I'll go ahead and find some inspiration to just make some plays at the board. And there are other ways to kind of attack this type of situation as well, where you put in more of your action on the river or whatever it is. But I just chose to sort of do this. My opponent bet, I made it 60, and my opponent called. And so in this spot, I think he, occasionally has a 9, but oftentimes has like an ace high that he's peeling with, a king, maybe like a queen 10, queen jack, jack 10 type of hand. But a lot of times something with some showdown value, like a random king or random ace high or something like that. And I think if you sort of keep barreling, you might get looked up quite a lot with, a hand like King 5 or something, just putting you squarely on basically, a queen, jack, jack 10, random bluff type of hand. But I think if you do this, he checks, and I bet 168 into 150 and make it sort of, using overbetting to sort of like polarize your range here. It's like, well, either I'm totally full of it or I've got the nuts, and which one do you want to decide? And if you do it on the turn like that, the one perk of that is that they're worried that that's not all they have to call to get the showdown here. It's that they might have to call the river as well, because, or they might have to guess again on the river, I should say, depending on what you do. So I think this is a spot where, if used sparingly, you can pick up the pot pretty often, just sort of manipulating bet size quite a bit. On the next hand here, this one sort of also falls in line a little bit with the same type of hand as the first hand, where you're just sort of deciding that no one has anything more than likely, and you're going to try and win the pot. Now, in the first example, we had a hand, but in this one, we don't. And this is the type of player, lots of clickbacks when he thinks you're kind of full of it, and just very sort of aggressive. And I just decided to kind of use that against him as best I could. I'd never really actually seen him show up with a hand when he did any sort of that clicking it back stuff on dry boards, because I did it with hands sometimes, and anytime I fought back with him, he just folded. So I'm just assuming he didn't really have anything. And so I go ahead and flat here with ace jack. As you can see, we're fairly deep, about close to 200 blinds here with player 5, and player 4 we're slightly deep. And player 5's he's got one of these like 90% flop c-bet in position type of things, and one of these like 60 or 70% range, button stealing range type of guy. So not really going to have much on this board too often. So it goes check check, and he bets 24. And obviously I have some showdown value, but he's gonna kind of barrel and a lot, and you're not really. It's just going to be a tough go of it to just sort of check call as if you're just going to induce bluffs or something from worse hands. So I suppose that could be an option, but I don't think check calling 3 streets here is going to be a very good idea against too many players, even if they are pretty barrel happy. And also, you can. There's just better ways to sort of manipulate your opponent's tendencies than to take that line. So I decided to go for a really big check raise here. Not really big, but close to 4x. It looks like a blind short of 4x. And I felt like, I might just win the pot a lot right here. This might not be a spot where he would fight back, or maybe he would just peel with any sort of pair or gut shot or something like that, or random king X and then fold the turn. I thought that, fold the turn unimproved. So I thought that might be a good way to also get him to put like $92 in the pot on the flop before he folds. Player 4 folds, and player 5 then clicks it back to me. And so, again, we can do all sorts of fun stuff here. There's no sort of set way, but I mean, again, this is a spot where I'm like, okay, dude, you don't have a hand like ever when you're clicking it back here in these positions. I mean, I feel like if he just had like a, like a king 7 would be worried that they could only get action from worse. I feel like, or at least all-in type of action from worse, and then, I feel like pocket 4s, pocket 7s, pocket kings, those type of hands would just sort of just call down, I guess. I mean, just basically, if, I mean, they would probably figure if I've got him, I've got him, but if I'm just sort of full of it, then just let them hang themselves. So I just think most people are just sort of tremendously unbalanced here. I just don't see a lot of people like click it back here at top set. So I decided in this instance just go ahead and flat and basically just lead any turn. So I just lead for 200 on any turn. I don't need to make it super big. It's just a little over half pot. Gives me a really good price. If he just calls, I also now have some equity, so that's pretty cool too. It still looks threatening. We're at 576. If he calls, it'd be 776, and then we've got a pot bet left on the river. So it doesn't necessarily look weak or anything like that. I mean, I'm sure that's what I would also do with, pocket 7s or something. So anyway, just go ahead and lead, and he folds. And again, I just think that's going to be a spot where, you might not want to do that stuff in your 50-cent $1 game or something like that, but as you get these more aggressive dynamics at higher stakes games, I think this is going to be a good way to play it. Or even just like the 1, 2, 2, 4 games. I feel like I see plenty of people that are really fighting quite a lot these days at those stakes. So just don't do it on nits is what I'm saying, or fish really, because they'll just call you down. So in this hand here, this is the same player from the hand before, who, like I said, was just very aggressive. I mean, just betting every street, it seemed like. Didn't really have much of a check back range, would bet his like hand that a lot of people might pot control in the turn, or not even necessarily pot control, but just sort of, figure they don't have the best hand or something like that, and just sort of check back and hope it goes to showdown. But he would just fire anything. I mean, it was pretty crazy, and but he's a good player, makes money for sure. But his style was just kind of bet. So I figured if that's going to be his line of thinking, then I'd feel like it would be good to let him do that and pop the river, otherwise known as the Mississippi Bluff. I'm definitely a big fan of the Mississippi Bluff. I go very few sessions where I don't do it at least once, and oftentimes it just comes up quite a bit. And it doesn't work 100% of the time, of course, but I feel like I definitely have made plenty of money with the Mississippi Bluff. And like I said, it's basically just the guy bets, the guy bets, the guy bets. You just keep calling, and then you just shove the river, regardless of your holding. And so my opponent raised here, and merge gets weird. I think the table just broke up and it got heads up, and sometimes you end up getting the button and the big blind, which is kind of messed up, but whatever, that's the way it is. It's the same for everybody, so it's not really a big deal. So, I mean, this type of flop where no one really has anything too much. So, I start by just calling here with ace high. I mean, expect to be good pretty often. And then a king comes and my opponent bets again. And I think he's going to bet that card with pretty much his entire range. And the river comes a jack and he goes ahead and bets again. So, I mean, I think he could be betting like any jack. He could be turning like a 4 kind of into a bluff a little bit. He could have, I mean, this guy could have like, 9 deuce. I mean, he just, and he, like I said, he could have like jack 3. He could have all kinds of stuff. Like I said, turning like a 4 into a bluff. So, if I feel like he's going to fold everything that's not a 6, then I think, even though I have some showdown value still here with ace high, I still think that shoving is going to be better if I can assume he's going to fold anything that's not a 6. And I haven't really made this play on him yet, so I don't really think that, I've never been sort of caught by him with that play, so I didn't think he would really expect it to be anything other than me slow playing something. So I just went ahead and just shoved the chips in here, and he folded. But I really think that's a play that is not used nearly often enough, and I think people get scared to just go broke with, with nothing, or just they feel like the guy's just going to call and have 6-5, and they're going to feel like an idiot. But I mean, the reality is like you're getting a pretty decent price on your play here, and he's just not going to have big hands every time, and you're going to make money, I think, doing that stuff. So I'd give that one a shot. But again, make sure it's against the right type of opponent. It's got to be somebody that is really, really barrel happy from out of position, which is a fair amount of people these days. I certainly see a lot of people with a lot of pretty huge flop, turn, and river c-bet percentages from out of position as the PFR. So I think that that's going to be a good line to take against people on boards that are tough for them to hit, and stuff where you can theoretically rep something. And a lot of times it just doesn't matter if you can rep it or not. I mean, granted, you could have won by calling against a hand like 8-7 or something like that, or 7-5, but you're going to get plenty of folds here making these plays, and you're going to get better hands to fold, and you're going to get worse hands to fold as well from time to time, and then you wouldn't have needed a shove there in that case, but it just is what it is. I think this is going to be a profitable play in the long run. Alright, so in this hand, this is not the same player, but very similar player, and given we went into some detail earlier, I don't think it makes much sense to go in too much to what I'm thinking here in this hand. I'm just sort of like, I start off kind of like calling because I have ace high, and I'm probably good a lot against this opponent, and then I make a pair, so okay, I call, and then he bets again, and I'm like, alright, so it's going to be tough for you to call this and just shove it on him. And I mean, he does. I mean, he's going to have to, it's going to be tough for him to call that. I mean, even if he has a hand as strong as king queen or something like that, it's still I mean, it a pair of like a hand like that he could have like ace 5 is like almost the same thing in this situation in his mind, because he's just figuring that I basically either have something that's pretty nutty, or I'm full of it. So king queen is just sort of in that category where it's just a bluff catcher, just like a hand like a even like a 5-6 or something like that in his mind. But I think these are good spots, just especially on these boards that are sort of tough for them to hit, and they kind of know that, so they barrel through a lot, trying to look super strong. I just really think it's a good situation for that, and it gets a lot of folds. So again, in the interest of maybe adding a few different lines to your playbook here, I kind of have a semi-interesting hand here. Lots of options on the flop, and I decided to take a little bit of a different line here. So I open ace-4 of hearts under the gun, button flats, and I catch a really great flop here. Nut flush draw and top pair, so pretty good deal. I decide to basically sort of start by check raising the flop. If my opponent bets and check raise, I do notice a lot of people that when you make these unusual plays, they just, again, they don't necessarily see it often enough to really know what the best play is. A lot of time they just have a suspicion that you're sort of full of it, and they tend to do things that really don't make a whole lot of sense, or they just they just weight things too heavily, I guess is the best way to put it, towards you being full of it and wanting to make plays against you. So my plan here is actually to check raise the flop, and then if called, bet the turn, and assuming it's some sort of brick, and then depending on the river, if it's a heart, probably just go ahead and go all in or something. But if it's not a heart, I'd go ahead and check call the river. And I think that the reason why I like that play is because I just notice you getting like floated with like pairs here, or like random hands like just like sort of like king jack, queen jack type of hands will like float you to the check raise, or especially a hand like an 8-7 or 8-9 or like a pocket tens or something like that. And obviously, of course, like hands like ace queen, ace jack, probably not ace king too often, but like ace 10, ace queen, ace jack are in their range as well. But the thing with that is that if you check raise the flop and bet the turn, and let's assume the board kind of bricks out, and you check the river, they're really like too scared to bet. They see no value in betting the river because they sort of have the mindset of, well, if he's bluffing, I'm not really going to get any value anyway, and if he's just, maybe thinks I'm on a miss flush draw and he's got pocket aces or something, maybe that's why he's checking the river. And they just can't really find like a worse hand that will necessarily call them that could play it that way. So they just take the showdown with those hands so often. And then you kind of like lose about the same as if you maybe bet the flop and bet the turn and bet the river or something, or had to check call the river or something because they could have a flush draw as well, or be bluffing you or something. You end up kind of losing about the same. But if you get there, it's nice to build the pot bigger. And the other thing is that the reason why I'm taking that check call line on the river is because those ace 10, ace jack, ace queen type of hands tend to not value bet the river, and so it's usually like their miss flush draws, which there aren't a ton of them because we have some of them blocked, but they're gonna bet like their miss flush draws, and then they'll turn like a hand like a pair of eights into a bluff sometimes, and they just do like or like their pocket tens or something into a bluff. And I just see that people show up with a lot of random holdings. Sometimes they just float the check raise on the flop and the bet on the turn just to see if you can bet the river, and if you can't, then they bet. So I just see people showing up with a lot of different stuff here. As it played out, it went check check, and then I turn pretty much gin here. I mean, it's probably better to make this hand than it is to make the flush, because the flush might kill more action against some better hands, or I should say against some good hands that he could have, like ace 10, ace jack, ace queen. So this card is really, really sweet here. I feel like I have the mortal nuts here every single time, and not a lot of cards out there that can really cause me to lose the hand there against a hand like ace jack or something, because obviously if it's like a jack of hearts or something, I can kind of cooler them. And then there's only going to be like two. If he doesn't have the jack of hearts, there's only going to be like two jacks that that would improve him. And then there's obviously some, the board can pair with the 8, and then I can get counterfeited. But other than that, there's not much to worry about. So I checked the turn, and my opponent bets, and I decided to go ahead and check raise. I feel like at that point he's gonna just think I'm sort of giving up and bet like his entire range. So and I feel like I can get a lot of action here by check raising, and it can also look a little goofy and get him pretty curious. So he calls, and the river is a complete brick. It's a 6. I don't really see him ever having a ace 6 here in this spot. Pot 154, and I was sort of messing with the bar, the bar slider there with the for the bet sizing. And I thought about maybe a small bet because maybe he's weak. I thought about maybe an all-in, potting it, and then I kind of decided like maybe all-in. He wouldn't think I would risk that much to run a bluff, but I might try and over-pot it to try and take him off his hand that way. So I went ahead and made it 226, and was lucky enough to get him to ultimately call with like 1 or 2 seconds left with ace queen there. So got some pretty good value there in that spot, almost completely stacking him, and gave myself a chance to really win a big pot off a hand like that. And I think it's a good way to just kind of mix up your play too in these spots and just play your hands a little differently. And I actually really like if I have like a king jack of hearts here, taking the same line as well, except hopefully they bet the flop, and then I would check raise the flop, bet the turn, and jam the river, and it makes it really hard for them to call down even with a hand like this. So I think that's going to be a pretty good play, and obviously you can get there too, which is always nice, and win a pretty big pot. So this one here is just sort of a spot where you take sort of a hint of equity and just basically just run a bluff, and I think that this gets through a lot, and I think multi-way pots are definitely something that most people don't play aggressively enough. I think the beautiful thing about multi-way pots and no limit hold'em is, on the downside, there's a lot of people that could have a hand, but on the upside, it's still hard, even with 3 other people in the pot, to make a big hand, and especially if you have like a 9 blocked here a little bit. You have some, a lot of great cards on the turn can come. Another 9, a 7, a jack, a 10, lots of different cards can obviously help you pick up, a straight draw or something like that. Apologize for that. Actually, not going to be picking up any straight draws on the flop there. I must have been seeing things, but yeah. So I just feel like you've got middle pair, you've got some hands blocked, you've got this backdoor flush draw here, and I think it's going to be a good spot to go ahead and just kind of go for it. You do have the backdoor straight draw as well. I guess that's kind of what I meant, but you're not gonna turn the straight draw, certainly. And you can also get people to peel a lot with ace X type of hands that will eventually just fold because they feel like you're just being so aggressive into so many opponents. And anyway, so I start off by making it like almost 52 into 60, and player 2 calls. So I think player 2 can have like a like even a queen 10 like for like a gut shot, or a jack 10, maybe a 6-7. I guess that's in his range. And but a lot of just like random ace X and flush draws and stuff like that. So with the brick here on the turn, doesn't really change anything. I just decided to go ahead and bet. Is this not working here? Let's see. Okay, so here we go. And so on the turn, I went ahead and bet. I think I just potted the turn. Yeah, I did. I potted the turn. And, again, I think that's a spot where, if you pot the turn, it's really going to be difficult for your opponent to, call with just a naked flush draw with, like King Jack of Hearts or something like that. And you just look. You can look just like a set, pretty darn well, especially flatting out of the small blind. I think a lot of times people give you credit for, like a pocket pair, and a hand like 8 or 9 certainly makes sense here in this spot. So, I mean, ideally, I could have got, some turn card that would, pick up more equity, like the 5 of clubs would have been great. But I suppose what you don't want to bet is something like the Queen of Hearts or something, because even though your opponent's basically going to have had Jack 10 or a flush draw, he's going to fold all aces for sure, but there's probably more of the flush draw combos and like the Jack 10 type of combos than there are ace X type of combos. I mean, I don't think he's probably not going to call the flop with like a ace as weak as like ace 3, ace 4. So I think we can take some of those aces out of his range and probably go with ace jack, ace queen type of hands. I mean, even though they're sort of the same hand in the sense that he's either kind of got me on a draw or he doesn't, but I think people just kind of tend to actually look at a hand like ace 3 as being different than ace queen here in this spot, like just in case I am leading out with ace king or something like that. Like they just look at the hand a little bit differently, I think. But yeah, I mean, I think overall, I mean, it's obviously nice if you turn equity or turn a 9 or a 10 or something like that, but I think that bricks are also really good. Once people do call, is just to go ahead and pot the turn on bricks, and I bet you'll notice getting a ton of folds there in those situations. Alright, so we're on to the free money plays category. Not entirely free money, but pretty close. I think that there's just a lot of spots where people are going to have, like, they just really can't be strong very often, or just are so rarely strong, and you're sort of in a position where they're going to give you credit so often that it's going to be a really good spot to increase your red line and get these sort of free money plays and get people to put chips in the pot when they're not really repping much and they're just not going to make it to showdown very often at all. Also, definitely helps if you have some equity too, but it's not always necessary. So I go ahead and flat here the min raise with ace 5 of clubs, and player 4 comes along, and we go to the flop 3 ways. And this flop, I mean, I've got a gut shot to a straight. Got a lot of cards that will give me two-way straight draws, like a 3 or a 2. So, and then obviously like an ace would give me top pair, and I got backdoor club draw. So I'm pretty happy with this flop, and also the important thing too is that it's just a really tough board for people to hit real hard, and it's just kind of a good board where you can rep you can kind of rep a narrow range, but people kind of give you credit for it, I think, at least ultimately. So player 1 checks, and this is, I think, the mistake people make, is they either check here and give up and let the button go ahead and basically take a stab at the pot and win, or they fire and they get peeled a lot with like overcards, and then if they don't improve some type of draw, then they just check fold the turn, and I think your opponent again could be flatting with all any pair and hands like even just like 2 overcards and stuff like that. Like a lot of people will just float you there in that spot, just to kind of see what you can do on the turn. But the play that's going to be really hard for them is they're going to almost always stab here on the flop, and then you can check raise the flop there, and I made it about 3x here in this spot. And I suppose if called, I mean, sometimes I just kind of close my eyes and just keep betting until I'm all in, and then hope that I get a fold eventually. But other times, depending on the opponent, if I think that they're, I don't know, just a little stubborn or something, I might like check the turn every time I pick up equity, and then check raise all in on the turn. Like especially if it's like a 3 of clubs or 2 of clubs or something like that. And then if the turn goes check check, then I just like open shove the river, and I feel like they're just confused and they just fold a lot there in those spots as well. Not every river, but most rivers. And you could do it like for weird value too. Like sometimes I'll have like king jack here. I've had hands play out like this where it goes check check, or excuse me, I check raise just because I think they're not repping much, and then they call. And then the turn like is like a 4, and you're like, oh man, not much to kind of continue to rep here, and so you go check check, and then the river's like a jack or a king, and it's basically kind of the nuts the way the board or the way the hand is played out with king jack there, and then I'll like open shove, and sometimes they obviously when I do open shove my air, it's not like it has 100% success rate, so likewise I'll shove for thin value there in those spots, and sometimes get looked up by like pocket 9s or something, or pocket 7s, and and you end up stacking somebody in just sort of a weird situation. So again, I kind of like to just set my opponents up to be confused, set them up to just make mistakes against your range. Now in this hand, nothing super excited happening. He just folded. But again, the mistake people make is just to bet to lead. And not like leading's bad; it's fine. But I just think this is better. And or just like check fold here, and it's just I mean you gotta fight for these pots here a little harder, I think. Not a ton of explanation needed for the next hand here, but sort of a similar concept. I go ahead and raise ace-10 from the cutoff. Player 3 calls, player 4 calls, and player 5 folds. So we go to the flop 3 ways, and the flop's just basically nothing. I mean, unless somebody has a very rare ace-3 or pocket 4s type of hand, and nobody really has anything that's going to want to kind of play an all-in pot. I guess player 3 could from time to time be flatting me with a strong hand, certainly like a hand like jacks plus, or something fairly strong, but for the most part he's just not going to be in a position where he wants to play an all-in pot, and player 4 almost never, because I don't think he's going to overcall with something really strong there. So I think the mistake a lot of people make is they bet the flop and with ace-10, and somebody calls them, and then they don't know whether to kind of fire all 3 streets to try and get the person off their hand, and they are kind of repping a narrow range, so a lot of times the board runs out like 9-2 or something, and they just call you down with pocket 6s or something. So I think the mistake a lot of people make is to bet the flop here, and of course also player 3 will be floating quite a lot here, and looking for opportunities to take the pot away. So and you're going to be out of position against that opponent. So I don't really like. I mean, I think again leading is profitable. It's fine, but I don't think it's the optimal play. I check here. Player 3 again is just going to bet almost always here, and if he doesn't bet, you can just barrel. Most. You can just bet most turns, and a lot of times turns and rivers, and get get fold. So it's not like if player 3 doesn't bet here, you're giving up on the pot or anything. So I go ahead and make kind of a smallish check raise to 105. And again, there's just not much he can do. I mean, in this spot, there's just not a whole lot of great options, truthfully. I mean, he could think I'm full of it all the time, and call and then shove over my turn bet, but and then I'd have a really difficult call. But I just think that most people aren't going to take those lines. And again, even though I said earlier, a lot of times people float you because you don't rep much, they just tend to get confused here with these types of situations and not really know if floating's good or if it's not. And, whereas situations that they see all the time, like a flop C bet, they have a much better idea of what your range is like. But when you make this play, they tend to have very little idea what your range is like. So I think this can be a pretty good play. And if called, I just usually bet half pot on the turn and shove the river. I mean, when they call there, it's just usually like an ace high calling, like floating you to, keep you honest, or like a hand like pocket sevens that thinks it's too weak to fold right away. And they just rarely get to showdown. And, by all means, play your jacks, queens, kings, and aces this way if you feel like it too. It's not the mandatory line, of course, but I take this line quite a lot with big hands, or even if I flop something like pocket fours. And it's not because obviously it's not a great value line, because here I am arguing that it's a good bluff line because it works so much. But you can just kind of toss it in, and if you get called down, you can show up with something from time to time. And you probably weren't going to get a ton of action anyway by just continuing to lead. So I don't really think that you're missing much that way. And again, when you do show up with a hand there, it's nice for being able to make this play with all kinds of junk as well. Alright, so in this hand I have pocket tens here in the small blind, and everybody takes the flop here, and we get a flop queen 2-4 rainbow. Player 3 is kind of a weaker player, leads out, not like a total, horrible player, but just kind of weak. Leads out for 24 here. And, the main reason I included this hand here is that I think people far too often feel like because they have pocket tens here, like even though this kind of looks a little weak, and betting half pot into 3 people, that, their option is sort of to fold or call. Like if they had a hand like ace 5, they might feel like they could check raise it and play it, more aggressively or something. Because they don't have, very much showdown value against this guy's range here in this spot, whereas tens do. But the bottom line is, I think if you think he's sort of full of it and he's gonna fold, and that you might not have the best hand, like he has some hand like queen 9 suited or something, but you got decent stacks here, and he's probably unlikely to go broke very often with that hand. And I don't think people lead with sets here. It's first of all, it's hard for him to have a set, and secondly, it's hard for him to also have a set and want to, make a half pot lead. I just don't think you see that very often. And I think, for the most part, bet sizes kind of tend to a lot of times mean what, they're kind of telling you it means. So, anyway, I just went ahead and just made it 72, and I was kind of expecting one call, and then, just to make a pretty big bet on the turn and get a fold. But I got a fold right there in that spot. And again, it might even be, I might have had the best hand. He might have had like sevens, but then, a lot of times like a king or an ace turns, and then they kind of turn their hand into a bluff or something, and then you get played off the best hand. So I just think it's much better to also give your opponent an opportunity to call one check raise as well, and get him to put more money in the pot, rather than letting it check down after that one bet with like pocket sevens. You can give him a chance to maybe make a stubborn call with that pocket sevens, or make the stubborn call with like queen 9 and then queen 10, and then fold eventually because they realize that they don't want to go broke with a hand that weak, and you're showing a lot of aggression, and yada yada yada. So anyway, give that some consideration. Don't always think just because you have a hand with some showdown value that you have to like play it one certain way. Poker is just about winning money, and whatever play wins the most money is what you should do. And if you're not sure which plays make money and which plays don't, that's where experimentation and watching videos like this and stuff like that come in. Okay, and the final hand of the video here of part 2, and I think part 3 and part 4 and part 1 are going to be the best videos. I think that this one I wanted to include a lot of these things because I think it'll be helpful, but I've been most excited about the other parts. So if this one wasn't as useful to you, hang in there, because I feel like you'll really like the 3rd and 4th videos. So anyway, I just wanted to say that for whatever it's worth. So player 6 opens to makes a pot bet, and again, kind of a really aggressive player post flop. You know, raising flop C bets a lot and check raising a lot, and, you know, just overall pretty aggressive. Also should note he has a really wide opening range. I kind of tend to, you know, just flat a bunch of, I mean, not always, but kind of depends on my mood. But I think on this particular day I chose to kind of flat like pretty much all my good playable hands, like ace jacks and ace 10 suiteds and ace queens, and, you know, and then I was just kind of flatting basically every good hand, like even like aces or kings against him, and then just 3-betting basically all my, you know, trashy like jack 9 offsuits and stuff like that, because he had a big fold to 3-bet and a big opening range in that spot, and I thought that that would be a good way to exploit him, is just be playing pots to them with really good hands in position, and then you know, just sort of taking advantage of the fact that he opens wide and 3-bets a lot, or excuse me, folds to 3-bets a lot. But, you know, I mean, eventually if I'm always folding when he 4-bets and, you know, we're going to showdown and he's seeing aces and kings, you know, then that's going to get obvious, so you can't overdo that too much. So I did flat here with ace jack in position, and player 5, who's kind of weak, came along. I think he was actually the fish at the table. I don't think he was completely awful. Well, it looks like player 1 might have been a fish too, but I'm pretty sure player 5 here was a fish that's sort of been getting hot, you know, winning some chips here. And so he leads out for, you know, half pot here, which I'm sure is like some hand like pocket 5s, or, you know, ace queen, or just some like BS holding that's never getting to showdown ever. And player 6 knows this, and so player 6 decides to raise. And I think right here is a spot where, you know, it's pretty darn close to free money play. This opponent's going to have, it almost doesn't matter what he have, even if he has like kings or aces. You know, obviously not if he has like deuces or a 7, but, you know, I mean, if he has like a king queen or something like that, or pocket 10s or pocket 9s, like all the hands basically, like if I go ahead and do this and flat, it just looks strong, and it's like no matter what he has, and like I said, unless it's, you know, a hand that like a, you know, ace 7 or pocket 2s or something, he's just not really going to like his situation too much. And having the ace of hearts, I guess, had a tiny bit to do with making this play, but I'm pretty sure I just make this play always. When it goes bet raise in front of you in a spot where nobody really is going to have much too often, and especially if stacks are a little bit deep, although they weren't in this case, I think it's, you know, this situation doesn't come up often, but it's sort of like, in my mind, like a pretty much mandatory float here, because player 6 just gets real face up on the turn, and mostly they just don't have anything, and they're just going to think, well, you called a bet and a raise, you're going to have, you know, full houses and, you know, trips and stuff like that way too much, and they're just going to give up on their hand. And so the turn was a 4 of hearts, and I actually didn't like that card that much. I mean, I guess I sort of liked it. I kind of had mixed emotions about it. I liked it in the sense that if he thought my flatting range there was like 2s, pocket 7s, maybe like a slow played aces or kings, and flush draws, then basically, you know, he's, unless he has something huge here, he's pretty much behind everything. So it helped my story a little bit more, although I don't think my story needed much more help. I think I told my story by calling the flop raise or bet and raise. to him. And so what I didn't want was for him to have a flush and sort of go into check call mode, because he could have raised a flush draw certainly, and improved to a flush in this case, and I don't think he's ever getting away. I think he's going to expect me to just keep betting my sevens, and he's just going to call down with a flush. So I was a little mixed, like I said, because he can actually improve, whereas if he had a flush draw and then the 4 came and it was like a 4 of diamonds or something, then he would just be still having to just check fold. He can't really do much else there in that spot. So anyway, mixed emotions in that card, but I did just go ahead and just kind of make a small little bet, half pot. There's really no reason. A lot of people overdo it there and make it like 2/3 or something, just unnecessarily big. I don't even know if I need half pot there. I mean, I could do even a little less, and get folds pretty often. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and keep your eyes peeled for these plays, because they are good. They're good ones that make money quite often. Especially like that pocket 10s hand we just discussed in the last. That was the last hand we discussed. When they lead half pot, they're just never making the showdown. It's just practically free money. You just have to be willing to risk some to take it, although it's not much of a risk in my opinion. So we'll start off part 3 with when their hand is face up. Like I said, we'll get through a few of the big decisions. These are all going to require longer explanations, because I think they're all like big pots, a lot of times where I was a little deep, and they pretty much all went to the river, I believe. So and a lot of them went to either river or showdown or something like that. So they're going to take a while to explain. So this will be 2 more parts here right now, and then we'll be done with the series. But so I hope you guys enjoyed this one. And again, feel free to ask me questions. Feel free to post hands that either went right or went wrong, that were like the ones I described in this video, and I can take a look at them. So I hope you guys kick butt at the tables, and